Hey everybody, it's Sally Hendrick with Shout Your Cause. I've got Keaton Wilson here and Elaine, is it Moore?
Yep.
Moore, awesome.
Yep.
So we're here to talk about the book White Fragility, chapters 7 through 10. This is our fourth meeting, I believe, and we've actually been able to do completely separate conversations about these chapters because they seem to be mutually exclusive. Like you don't have to read one to get something out of it. I do feel like the groupings, though, have worked really well so far. I've kind of based it on the fact that it was about an hour listening time on the audio book for each meeting that we've done. And I listened earlier today and took quite a few notes, as I always do. So how are you doing, Elaine and Keaton? All good?
Doing great.
I'm doing great.
Yep.
So have you run into any uncomfortable situations over the last few weeks? We haven't met in about 3 weeks. Any conversations or anything that maybe you've been able to step back and evaluate or have a conversation with anybody?
No, fortunately or unfortunately, I've been around in a little bit of a bubble in that everybody's kind of like-minded, so I can actually bring up this book and people are like, oh, that sounds so interesting. And
right.
So that's been good. And they've not been just people that I normally interact with, but just even some new people. I've been able to have some conversations, say I'm reading this book and they say, oh yeah, we've heard about that. And that's actually been kind of refreshing that I don't have to couch it in with something else and dance around. So that's been kind of good.
Which is one of the themes of one of the chapters.
Yes.
About avoiding conflict in these conversations or kind of like washing over them. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. So what about you, Keaton? Have you had any struggles recently or anything interesting you'd like to share before we jump into the chapters?
I have dealt with some difficulties where I feel like I don't feel 100% comfortable talking about this book or the issues that this book brings up, and hopefully with the right mindset and attitude and approach, I can maybe one day bring it up one day and provide some kind of clarity where we can come to a mutual understanding and appreciation for what the book talks about and how it relates to today.
I wanted to go to the link actually that's playing right now, and I'm going to share it out to make sure that it's fresh in the news feed for people. So just bear with me on that. I've just shared it onto my page. Let's see, my own personal news feed, and I've shared it on the Shout Your Cause page. So hopefully people will start to get those notifications and will join us in the conversation. All right. So the last time we met, let's see, I think we had like 4 or 5 people. So we had quite a conversation going on, which was really great. And I know that we're a couple of more people that were going to show up today that are not here, but that's okay. We'll still go through it anyway. And Elaine, I think you've been here every time, which I really, really appreciate. Woohoo! You win the prize.
I'm waiting for my gold star.
Awesome. If there was a monetary prize, that would be nice, right?
Oh well. Yeah.
Okay, so this chapter 7 started out, and it's basically about white defensiveness. And it seems to carry out through all of these chapters, really. Basically, when any kind of racist topic is brought up or discussion around that, we tend as white people to get defensive rather than considering the feelings and validating the situation of the person telling us their story. And whenever we create that block or defensiveness, it tends to shut down the conversation. And instead of just acknowledging that these things exist or that there's always something that we can do better, when we shut down that conversation like that, you lose trust with the person you're talking with. You don't make any progress. There's a whole denial around it. And I don't know, it's just kind of a shame because you can't move forward and you can't actually say, hey, let's discuss this and then figure out a way to move forward and move on from it. So anything you want to add to that? Hi, there's Camille. She says hello.
Hi, Camille.
Hey, Camille.
Oh, hey, Camille.
See, Camille.
She always shows up.
I would think when you talk about, the only thing I would add is that if it is sad because it's just like you described, there's just this complete breakdown. But the funny thing is that I can look at my own personal experiences when there had been gentle places like where maybe it just flowed a little bit, maybe naturally. I've had encounters where it seems like the people are like hearing you and receptive and listening. But really all it did was it was a conversation of pleasantry. Like it was in more of the abstract, they wouldn't argue. They would be, oh yeah, you're
Right.
absolutely right. But then when there was something that was decidedly pointed, where they were the direct whatevers, then all these, everything that they mentioned, all the triggers, all the behaviors, I'm like, oh my God, I've seen them all. And it's just like, but that was the time, I guess, when you got close and when it was uncomfortable, the people in particular didn't want to hear it. And so they do all these things to shut it down. And then afterwards, you've had this painful encounter that not only do they whatever feel, however they're feeling, me as an individual, it's felt the same way. It's like, well, there's no point. There's no, why am I having this dialogue with you? We have reached an impasse. And so it's a sad chapter. It's like, Jesus. It's like you just can't.
One thing I'd like to kind of bring up to compare it to is just like maybe a marriage or some type of, partner relationship. Whenever we're not listening to the other person and we're not acknowledging the fact that maybe we're not giving the proper ear to what needs to be discussed, we can't always be right. No. And when you change it over to the racist discussion, we're all racist in some way. All of us are. We all have it in us. We all create some sort of belief system within us or have that in us. But based on what we're taught, based on what we see, whether it happened in our families or not is really not the discussion here. We're talking about it can happen in movies, it can happen on TV, it can happen in the community, it can happen in schools, at workplace, whatever that may be. If it happens in all these places, we have witnessed this and we have experienced it, and we need to be able to stop insulating ourselves from the fact that this is something that needs to be discussed. We can't be offended and push people away from the conversation because that's just kind of like the passive aggressive response.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the themes in this chapter, she talked about three things called field, capital, and habitus. And I thought this was interesting. At first, I wasn't going to take notes on that because I was walking outside and I thought, I don't even know what the word habitus means, so I'm not going to type this up. But then I kept listening to it. I was like, I probably should type this up. And so the first one was when she talks about field is basically our location or the situation where we are in that moment. So let's say that you are at school, or you're at work, or you're at home, or you're in the community. Maybe you're, maybe you're at the hairdresser. It could be anywhere, really. It just in life, the field is going to be the space that you're in, and the comfort level that you have around that. Then you go into what they call capital, and capital basically means the social value and perception of status that you have within the situation that you're in. Basically, power shifts happen depending on where you are. For example, you could be maybe the office worker versus the janitor in a building.
Right.
And whenever you are in your office, you have the power of the aura of the conversation or the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the janitor's room or office or closet or wherever, that's the janitor's space. And people act differently when they're in different spaces and their social status changes. It's a subconscious, kind of unconscious thing that we tend to navigate, if you will. And then the third thing was habitus, which is the position occupied by the person. The notes I have are when social cues are unfamiliar, we tend to strategize to regain balance. It's not necessarily a conscious response. It is created by learning over time how to behave within those fields, like the field, the capital, and the habitus.
And how to fluidly move between them.
Yeah, and how to fluidly move between them. Basically, what we try to do is create the minimum amount of racial stress, but it's triggered by defensive moves, argumentation, silence, or exiting the situation is how we tend to approach it. So if we're ever approached by a racial situation and we are trying to navigate that and we feel uncomfortable, the white response tends to be either argumentative, to not say anything and just to clam up, or to leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the response. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, think about it. If you've ever had that conversation with anybody, those are probably the three things that you're going to experience from them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when did you read this part? Did you read this before or did you read this recently, Elaine?
I probably read this. I've been pretty much on target. So this one now I probably read maybe a couple of weeks ago because I just finished up chapter 11 like Friday. So I think I read this in the very, very beginning. So I'm kind of going through where I highlighted, but it's been a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's been so many, I just would say overall, as far as reading this book, when I was describing it to some new person I met, there's been so many light bulb moments. Just so many. I don't feel, it was so enlightening. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. If you stop and think about it, and you have to because it's so heavy.
Yeah.
I told Keaton that like every paragraph could be made into a meme, and then it would be a meme that would make you stop and think and go, And so when you're reading it or listening to it, you can't just listen straight through because then you'll miss the meaning. It's almost like you have to chew on it and absorb it for a bit before it really resonates with you.
I would have to, one of the many ones that got me, and I said, man, this would have been helpful to know several months ago when viewing the good, bad binary, how people, because that's like one of the triggering things because people have this understanding that, it's good or bad, black or white. And I was like, oh, wait, it's not. So then therefore, that could be one of those segues where you can sit there and you could use that as like owning your own part of it and then sneak it in when you're talking to the other folks. Because if you're like, hey, I'm owning it. So it's like, hey, I'm doing it. So are you, then like, oh, it kind of can be disarming, but yeah. Very neat.
I particularly remember this one example that I wrote some notes on from this chapter was when this teacher had spoken to a couple of girls in the class at the desk. They had come up to the desk for some reason, and the teacher had called one of the students girl, and one of them took offense to it and the other one didn't. And it became kind of a controversy. Mm-hmm. And so this other teacher that had actually gotten in some much bigger real trouble with like a lot of insensitive racial comments in a class. He basically said, he mentioned this other situation with the teacher that had called the student girl. And he basically said, well, you can't say anything anymore and not be offensive or whatever, you know, everybody's sensitive and all of these different things. But basically what happens in that situation is that if we're lacking knowledge about why the person took offense, or if we're not asking their perspective and allowing them to give their perspective before being completely dismissive, then basically you're saying, I'm not concerned about your feelings. My intention was not this. But the thing is, that's when you start talking about intention versus impact. Mm-hmm. And if the impact is negative, you're still responsible for that, even if your intention was different. Mm-hmm. So what you have to do, instead of making excuses about your intentions, it's better to analyze what you did and how it was impactful and to figure out a way to change that for a future situation. That's like that's like saying the perfect apology. And acknowledging someone. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily saying, oh, I'm a bad person when you acknowledge something like that. It's just saying, I hear you and I understand you, and I am going to try to not do that again. Right? Mm-hmm. So this teacher ended up being really arrogant, and he used the incident that he'd brought up about this other teacher to increase racial divide in the situation instead of lessening it. And so instead of tamping down the fires, the embers, or whatever of the situation, he just put gas on it and made it worse. And I think that that's something that's really hard for us to do in life in general, in any situation, is to acknowledge that something may come across to somebody differently than what you intend. So I've got on my emails, and I don't know if you've ever seen my emails before. I've got just my regular email when I send something out. I have a quote down below that basically is the Maya Angelou quote that says, oh gosh, what is it? Something like you can, people aren't going to remember what you say. They're not going to remember what you do, but they're going to remember how you made them feel.
Yes. Yes.
That's the overarching thing. You'll have an argument with somebody and you'll get to the point where you don't even remember what the argument is about, but the feeling and the energy around that person will last and last and last.
Yeah.
Because of how you felt coming out of a situation. And she said, it's our responsibility to take care of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
100%.
Yes.
So anything, before we jump into the next chapter, anything, does that bring up any story for you? What about you, Keaton? It doesn't have to be a racial story. It could be something that's just.
Well, there's a lot of different situations that I could talk about. And I know I'm being recorded. So,
you're right there on my Facebook page. So be careful who you talk about. No.
Why viewership?
Nobody's watching right now, so.
I just know that what you said is 100% true for me, because there have been so many arguments that I have been a part of where I don't remember the exact exchange. I don't remember what was going. I don't always remember even what the argument was about. I just remember how the other person was responding and how that made me feel, good or bad. It could have been a very polite exchange, but the impression sticks with you forever. And there are too many examples for me to name just one specific one. What about you, Elaine?
Well, I thought it was really good when Sally was mentioning relationship, and you mentioned a wide array, but one of them was marriage. And I can kind of I can speak of the wonderful attributes and the benefits of therapy. They're just awesome, fabulous. Everybody should go, even if you're by yourself. You should go. But
Amen.
What I could say is that as over the time as we've gone through sessions, that's been something that the word that I've learned and use is engagement. And that's the part of like being physically present and being aware and thinking about what you're saying and how it's affecting and just kind of being invested. And so when you're talking about how things make you feel, there's lots of times when we're discussing things and there's no volatility, but we're just talking. And so there's that time and that space where you can sit there and be careful and mindful of how you say things. And also you can follow up and say, hey, or even the neutral third party, the therapist would be like, okay, so how did you feel when he said this to you? Or how did, and so that's been a really good tool to teach us how to speak and to listen, so that it's not like what you were just indicating, that there's times where it may or may not have been an argument, but you remember what was said or how it made you feel. And that stuff lingers. It leaves an impression for years. So yeah, I can totally say that it's very important to think about your impact along with your intent, and to be mindful. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Something else that happened this week, which I thought was interesting, was a friend of mine online. She lives in another country.
Yeah.
But she said that someone had cast aspersions on her. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? I had to look it up.
Yeah.
I'm like, I could do numbers, but sometimes vocabulary might knock me upside the head. And I was like, oh, casting aspersions. That basically means that someone is they're delegitimizing what it is that you're doing, like for a living or for study or for, whatever it is that you're doing. They're judging it, and they are basically creating a situation saying that it's not worthy of doing, or
would that
what I mean?
Denigrating?
Do what?
Would that be the same? Like, would a synonym be denigrating?
It could be. I don't know. I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
I don't know. Denigrating. It might be. Denigrate is to criticize unfairly or disparage. Casting aspersions it says an attack on the reputation or integrity of someone or something. So they're basically saying that the meaning behind whatever you're doing is crap. They're just delegitimizing like what it is that you're doing, like for a living or for in a relationship or whatever it is, that something you may be doing something that's really important to you. And it brought up something in me personally. I have someone in my life who said something to me like, oh, you say that you're helping individuals in your business, but you're doing Facebook ads or something.
Oh my God.
And I was like, every one of my clients is an individual business owner who's the solo person doing that business. And I'm helping them to be able to make money and do their business. That's what I do. And I focus on people who have businesses that help create positive change in the world.
Right.
So I have a very focused thing.
Well, even I was going to say the stuff that you've done. What I see on Facebook, when all the things of COVID, and using your knowledge of the actuarial stuff and the stuff,
the virus update.
That's been to help. It's been. Oh yeah, that was. People are stupid. I'm sorry.
Well, It hurt my
Well,
feelings.
that's one way to put it. That yeah.
Leave it to me. It's real simple. Sorry. But yeah, it's stupid. It's not true.
It hurt my feelings, definitely.
Even though you know
I
it's
was
not
like,
true.
Yeah.
oh, I know it's not true,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it can still hurt
It-
your feelings though.
Absolutely. That just makes me mad.
So basically what I did with that situation was, I mean, my immediate reaction would be, I'm going to write back and I'm going to defend myself and I'm going to say this, and this, and I'm going to be argumentative about it and whatever. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to respond. I just can't do this anymore. This person has done this to me many times over the years. And so, and does it to a lot of other people as well. And it's kind of a passive aggressive kind of a situation. And so the way that I had to handle it was just, I'm disengaging from this argument because this is not going to go anywhere, because this person obviously doesn't know enough about me to care.
And doesn't care enough to know.
And doesn't care enough to know.
Right.
And they're not coming in and asking me the right questions to be able to make this judgment and pass this judgment on me. It also was something like they were responding to something that I had done that they were not appreciative of.
Right.
And instead of coming at me with their arguments, they came at me with their offensive attacks in a completely different direction on something else. And then cast aspersions on what I do for a living now.
Yeah.
And
just
so
just to hurt you. It's just awful.
Yeah, it was specifically to try to basically cut me off at the knees.
Yeah.
To say, you're unworthy.
Yeah.
So I just I just walked away from that.
That was
but you wonder, it's like, if I do go back in, we've got to have rules of engagement, I guess.
Yeah.
Don't you
but
think?
Those individuals won't respect those rules of engagement.
Yeah.
They've got their own playbook.
And that's the other thing too. Like, speaking of rules of engagement, that was chapter 10.
Yeah, that was chapter 10.
And I may jump right to that because I think that's important to talk about. Because I wrote down all of these things. Basically, white fragility, the name of the book, creates rules of engagement. We have this perception that only terrible people can be racist or enact racism. There's a conceptual ideal when it comes to racism. But at the end of the day, like I said before, we all have it in us. There are racist ideals in us because it's all around us. It's systemic and institutionalized. And even if we don't personally feel a certain way, there's certain advantages that we have as white people. So the rules of engagement, though, make it impossible to engage in dialogue that leads to real change. And these are rules of engagement that we put forth as white people. There's a righteous indignation about it. There were 11 points that he made. And Keaton, you may not realize this, but I typed up every single one while we were walking. Okay.
I knew you were going to town on your notes.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how you're able to type and walk. That's crazy. I can't do that.
We come in and we say that we can't take feedback. We kind of put up a wall against getting feedback. That any feedback we do give or any conversation we have has to come across in the proper tone, as the tone that makes us comfortable. We must trust the other person fully before we'll engage in the conversation. Our relationship must be issue-free before we go into the conversation. So no baggage. Feedback cannot be, feedback needs to be immediate. It cannot be brought up like 2 weeks later. That kind of negates the whole topic if you bring it up 2 weeks later, which is kind of
like silly. There's a statute of limitations.
Yeah, there's statute of limitations on your feedback. Also, that feedback must be given privately, never in a public setting or in any kind of embarrassing way. All examples and discussions must be indirect instead of direct, because directness can be seen as insensitive. I must feel safe. As a white person, I must feel safe. And then highlighting my racial privilege invalidates my experiences of other types of discrimination. So basically, whenever you go into this, you can't bring up other things like sexism and whatever, classism and other things into the conversation. I don't know. I don't know. I'll just have to skip on to the next one. But the last one was that if you come to me with something that you're uncomfortable with in a racist way and I'm white, then you have to allow me to explain myself until I'm right. And those seem to be you think about it, those seem to be the rules of engagement that we put forth.
Then that's why there's no conversations. You can't.
Then there's no conversation. We can't act on the feedback. We can't reflect or swallow our pride for a moment, and that's what then happens. So, to be made comfortable instead of uncomfortable erases the opportunity for progress. And to have these conversations actually takes skill. We have to develop these skills to be able to listen to people and to be able to react in such a way that's not defensive and putting, a wall up, creating the argumentative arena, doing the exit strategy, or being silent. And stopping our racist patterns, this is what she said was the most important thing about that entire chapter. Stopping our racist patterns is more important than denying that we have them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So thinking about racist patterns, I think we could probably talk about some examples of that we might have in our own lives. So, do you make assumptions about people when you see them walking down the street?
I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was
and then I've also witnessed other people make assumptions out loud, and I failed to correct them or to enlighten them.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah. I know that there was a situation, this didn't deal with elements of race. And it was kind of interesting how it turned out. Is there had been, what's the name? Dang it. What's the name of the paper that's in Nashville? That was the paper that you pay for $1 that for the homeless individuals that have them.
The Courier or
you remember though.
Yeah, it's right down here. They do it at the
Contributor.
The Contributor.
Yes.
The Contributor.
Well, this is an old story. It was several years back, and there was this one guy that it seemed like that was his territory. And I don't know, he hadn't been there for long. We've been there maybe for, I don't know, he'd be the same day every week or something. And I realized that every time he was on the one side of the street, I crossed the street.
To go away from him?
To go, I still had to pass by him. But and I don't know what happened. I don't know if I did that once or twice. But the next time, I felt so, or it might have been after that time, I felt so pained that I had done that. That I was like, I was kind of one of those things where praise like, give me another chance, God, give me another chance. So I ended up the next time I stayed on the same side of the street. I spoke to him, and we actually became buddies. And what was funny was we just was recognize his humanity. And I don't know why excuse me, sorry. I don't know why I was scared of. It made no sense. It made no sense for me.
Well, it could be that day you just didn't want to be approached to ask to pay for a newspaper.
Maybe, but it my heart wasn't in the right place. I just didn't like how that made me feel. And so then anyway, what ended up happening after that is I was like, I moved past that. And what was funny though was he became kind of like a friend of mine. Like if I saw him in passing otherwhere, just anywhere.
Hello. And
actually, funny enough, he has a Facebook account. We're Facebook friends. But so what ended up happening was when I'd have other coworkers and we were going to and so like say if he was on the other side of the street and we were on the opposite side, I'd be like, oh wait, hold on, Greg, or whoever you are, and I'd be run across the street, hey, hugs, talk, and then you'd see my coworker looking at me like, what?
How do you know? And
I was like, nice guy. He does poetry and da 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 da. So that was one time where I was not pleased with myself, but at least I was given an opportunity to do different.
Yeah.
And I think, like sometimes we mess up, sometimes we don't say things, but I think there's always going to be more opportunities for us to, I don't know, learn, grow.
I think I may have mentioned this before in one of our talks. I don't know if it was about white fragility or if it was on one of our other meetings that we had prior to that when we were talking about 13th or whatever, one of the other talks that we had. But I was running back when I was in shape and younger. I was running down the street in another city in another state. We were on a little vacation and there was no sidewalk and it started to rain a little bit, but I was jogging down the edge of this street and then morning traffic started coming and it was starting to get busier. And I mean, I had hardly any room and a lot of cars were coming. And so I was kind of, it was a precarious situation. And I twisted my foot, ended up, I broke, I chipped a bone in my leg.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I could not move. My ankle swelled up like a grapefruit immediately. And there was no way for me to get up and get back to where I was going. I had to have someone to take me. And funny enough, a white man pulled up in a car and asked me if I needed help. And I was scared. And I looked at him and I said, no, thank you. And then a black man pulled up and asked me if I needed help. And I looked at him and I said, yes, please. I just need to go right down the road. I was on the same road as the bed and breakfast we were staying in. And I got in the car with him and he took me to the place and let me out. And,
well, that's interesting.
Isn't that weird though? There was this trust that I had. It was just an instinct. But sometimes I'm like, is that something that I worked on? Is that something that intuitively I have when I look at somebody in the eyes?
Right.
Or
a mix of both?
Or was I challenging myself?
Maybe.
I don't know. I obviously put the trust out there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ended up having to go to the hospital and all of that. But that was a situation where it's like, can that be a racial situation or just instinct about anyone or,
Or now this is a stretch, total stretch, may not have had anything to do with it. But you know how they talk about the power dynamics that sometimes when white women are in a position of power, that black men have an innate fear of being in situations of white women could it have been, that you're like, oh, I know the likelihood he won't do anything to me because it'll fall harder on him than a white man.
No, I would never do
okay.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
I just was throwing that out there.
Kind of like a gone with the wind attitude, I think. But okay. I did not feel that way at all.
Okay.
I don't know what it was.
Interesting. Well, you may have a good gauge.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that we have to challenge ourselves around. Now, granted, if we're ever in a situation that's dangerous, we should always be careful of that. Absolutely. But to know that it was an intentional thing back in, and even today, to paint the black man as being a dangerous person, that's something that is done intentionally.
It is.
I mean, the first thing that happened after slavery was abolished was to incarcerate Black men to work on these farms in the South or wherever, in other places too, to make it illegal for just what's the word that where you're hanging out?
Loitering?
Yeah,
loitering. To be put on a chain gang for loitering.
Isn't that insane?
Imagine.
Well, and what is it? You talk about the different, my husband, when he's been in Facebook, and there's been situations where, I don't know if there's been casting aspersions, but there's been folks when he's pointed out things that there are individuals who will be completely silent for months and years on his Facebook profile, but it's like they're just waiting for him to say things so that they can kind of attack him and get him in an argument. And these are people that maybe he went to high school with. My husband's Black. These are white people. And it's in these past several months, there's been several instances. And the thing is and they get ticked off at him and try to, I don't know, pigeonhole him into this area, accusing him of being angry or whatever. And like, these are bad things when they're coming at him and with guns blazing. And he's like, no, that wasn't, nothing I said came across as angry as the people that are coming to him. But it's like him in his position. That's unfortunate. It seems like they just are trying to silence him. Yeah. Like he doesn't have a right to his feelings. He doesn't have a right to be angry. He doesn't have a right, or if he does, he's clearly not following these rules of engagement. Right. And it pisses them off. And so then they come at him and like,
you have to make it comfortable. And if you don't, I'm going to go get my gun.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, but there's, and because I'm like, they're just, yeah.
Jumping back a little bit, I wanted to just kind of quickly talk about a couple of the themes. Chapter 8 was, it started out with a story about a girl named Karen. Kind of funny. Karen is talking over Joan. Karen is an extroverted white woman who speaks loudly to everyone. But Joan is not used to having a white woman tower over her and take over, whatever, and be very aggressive. And so Joan is asking Karen to tone it down a little bit. And of course, Karen just gets worse. She gets extremely offended and then exits as if she's being treated unfairly, kind of like a similar thing of like, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to argue. And then I'm going to exit the conversation because I'm not going to move forward and address any of your concerns. Right. This is a situation where there are 55% of white people who will say that they are discriminated against, yet a much, 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 much smaller percentage has ever experienced it. So they'll say, yes, I've been discriminated against. And then they'll be like, okay, so what happened? And then they'll be like, oh, I can't give an example. It's completely opposite for Black people. And then this chapter also talked about whenever the Oscars, remember Oscars So White, the hashtag?
Yes.
Oscars So White, a couple of years ago, there had been 2 years in a row where no Black people had been nominated for anything in the Academy Awards. Mm-hmm. And so there was this boycott, the Oscars So White, kind of a protest going on. And Helen Mirren, the British actress that's older, that really beautiful woman with white hair.
Oh, is that who that is? Okay. Mm-hmm.
She basically had said, kind of like, it is what it is. She basically avoided the conversation and exited it. Like she put a stamp on it. Like, that's just what happened. This is not anything intentional. And it's not that it was intentional on the part of the people making the decisions. Mm-hmm. However, when you're not used to considering, you think about it, this is normal and totally natural. When there's a role model in life that looks like you, sounds like you, feels like you, acts like you, that's the one that you go for, right? So if you're the one making the decisions about everything and you're making judgments about a body of work,
Mm-hmm.
you're inherently going to be subjective about it and use your own viewpoint as the judge of what's good and what's not good. If you don't intentionally figure out how something objectively influenced audiences in like movies and such, then you are not giving it the fair chance that it needs. You're not giving it the right judgment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You go with what's familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're always going to go with what's familiar. So if certain films and directors and actors and whatever are not recognized, is that because the person is biased? Well, of course they're biased, because that's all people are. All people are going to be biased towards their own comfort, their own situation. But to be objective and to really judge something for its merit, you've got to be able to bring in the right judges. You've got to be able to look at all the pieces objectively. And if you can't do it objectively or have a conversation that's objective around it, then it's not being fair.
Right.
So that's what that was. And then there was there was something too about bullying and the way that we react. So if a white person is challenged with something around racism, white women will cry.
Yeah.
Or they'll be very argumentative and make it very difficult and miserable to confront them.
Yeah.
They will scream and yell and hold their guns across their chests. It is basically a defense mechanism to bully the challenger, which is a form of white racial control. And that response is done to maintain that power and control, which I feel is what's happening today. Like Kenosha.
Oh dear God.
The stuff that's happening there is really sad. And I don't agree at all with any of the rioting and things like that. But I do understand it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it. But
you don't have to like it. You can understand why it's going on. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, you get to a point where people are so not listened to.
Yeah.
It's like, you think about it from a parent-child perspective. The parent's in control all the time, and the child is the one that's having to deal with the way that the parent parents. Mm-hmm. And if it's inappropriate or oppressive, the child is going to act out.
Yeah.
So if you look at it in society like that, where you've got an oppressive race and things that are happening, somebody gets shot, whatever happens there, and then you have a response by the community, and then there's always going to be the element that destroys. You've got vast majority being peaceful and protesting and saying this isn't right, you need to make this right. That the only change that we have ever affected in this country ever has been through protest.
Right. And a lot of times it unfortunately it has to be violent. I mean, I'm not, but I'm saying it's like you protest, and the people just get ticked off, and then it's like it takes something really extreme to get everybody's attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't like it, but it just seems, history continues to repeat itself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Until something else has to happen, that's more severe, more impactful. And then there's always going to be those people who kind of complain about it, and mm-hmm. for lack of a better word, and mm-hmm. say that, this is so bad. And I'm like, well, you didn't listen before.
Yeah. You weren't having a conversation before.
Yeah. You wouldn't watch the documentaries. You wouldn't listen to your friend. You wouldn't make friends with,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if the peaceful protests don't work, then what will? So then they had to resort to something else to get people's attention and to get people listening.
Yeah. And not saying that the ones who, because I do think that you have these groups of the factions, you also have the other things where you've got other folks who are trying to muddle the message. So I don't think necessarily the violence is always taking place on the folks who are like, hey, I'm trying to get your attention. You've got the other side who are trying to discredit or cast aspersions.
Yeah, they're trying to manipulate it by coming in.
Manipulate. So you got that element too. But in general, it's like, it's basically saying, look at me. Look at this. Examine this. Let's do something different, because if people were listening, it wouldn't have gotten to that.
Yeah. Oh, it has me worried, though, I have to say. People are crying out for help. They're saying, please listen.
Yeah.
Please pay attention. Please do something. You've got others who are taking it from a very middle of the road, moderate standpoint, and they're doing the actions and they're doing the things and they're changing the laws, or they're writing things and going in to lobby for that. Or they're running for office, or, whatever it is they're doing, or they're developing policies within their communities. And so there's a lot of people that are taking action in all these things. And those are the ones who are running this country anyway. All the people in the middle that are trying to really do the right things. Yeah. It's always the far right or the far left. The fringes that create all the noise, and then that's what the media tends to report about, because that's sensational and that's what makes people click and read.
Views.
And then but unfortunately it alters the perception of what actually is happening. And unless somebody is an activist and gets in there and helps to do things and understands what groups are doing what, unless they're in there getting their hands dirty, they're the only ones that actually know the truth, the ones who are doing the work.
Well, what was it? If you talk about, okay, you've got the BLM, and then you've got the other side. I have been
the other side. I just heard there's like the angry somethings, and
I don't remember what, but I've been. I'm not an expert, but I think I've been to like 2 or 3 actual BLM protests. Yeah, I've been to them.
But those are not sanctioned by the actual Black Lives Matter organization. That's
but the ones that I've been to, they've been totally peaceful, totally. But then you have folks talking about like they're putting everything in one basket, and I'm like, have you even been? If you've been to that's not the truth. It's not the truth. It's just not.
Unless you're there and on the ground and watching and observing and talking and taking action. Having discussions, you're in the groups, you're at the meetings, you're writing the legislation yourself, you are contributing. Like there's a whole thing coming up. I can't remember the name of it, but I've got an email on it, and I just was added to this activist group for politics, and it's basically 50% of the people in there are independents, and then 25% Democratic and 25% Republican. And they are assigning every member a topic to research, and they're giving you a starting point to, of things to pull together. And so I signed up the other day, and my first assignment is healthcare costs.
I saw that.
I was like, oh, wow, that's something I know a lot about. So
it's good.
I'm kind of nervous, but I'm kind of excited. I'm hoping that if I go and I do the research and I come back with some things that maybe I could rise up within the organization as a leader to say, here's some things that I want to bring up, because I talk about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would be nice. If anybody else wants to do it, let me know. All right. Well, if there's anything else you want to talk about, we can. But otherwise, I've pretty much covered all of the major points of chapters 7 through 10. And our next meeting, I haven't scheduled it yet, but it'll be, at least a couple of weeks away. And we will finish the book all the way to the end and have our final discussion. And then I'll be pulling all the videos together and a blog post summary of everything in one place.
Well, that's going to be exciting.
ever want to go back to it or send anybody to it to listen to our conversations, or to just read the blog post summaries, because I'm going to use my notes that I've been taking on my walks. That's how I'll write the blog. Okay.
Cool.
That's exciting.
Nice meeting you, Keaton.
Nice meeting you too, Elaine.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I will see you next time. Okay.
See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.